Good morning. I hope you're doing well. Let's see who's here in the comments. Looks like there's a lot of activity. Good morning, David. We got a GM. B for victory. Good morning, Bitcoiners. Indeed. Good morning. Good morning. Gonna be hot in Montreal, P-Man Fan says. Yeah, I think I'm out of here. I think I'm gonna go to Vermont today. A little too hot for me. Bon matin à tous. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it'll be like 90 something in Montreal today for that's pretty hot for Montrealers. Robert has a GM with a nice purple heart indeed. Hassan, what's up? Matt, hope you're doing well. Bon matin, bon matin, bon matin. Good morning. And what do we got here? Basic biology, 16 waiting and 7 likes. We're so close to 50% of viewers liking this. We love the likes, everyone. We love the likes. Coffee and a... I didn't do it today. Dang it, Bitcoin Graffiti. What am I thinking? I was so busy getting the show ready this morning. Okay, tomorrow I shall do it for sure in Vermont. I did not do an I-Ching today. I am sorry to disappoint you. Maybe we'll do it live though, actually. Yeah, maybe I'll just pick it up and do it. So pause that. We might get an I-Ching reading today indeed. Anyway, so we may indeed get it. Now, before we get started, I just got to share my confirmation that the sun indeed rose in Montreal and will indeed bring high temperatures today, which we are fleeing. But before we flee, we'll have a coffee because Bitcoin's running. Right, I got the order a bit screwed up today, but Bitcoin, I can confirm, we're running. Right, no Bitcoin troubles this morning. So let's have a coffee and talk about what's new. I had a bad sleep last night. I'm okay. It wasn't my own sleep problem. We had, sometimes kids, they don't sleep great. I had a daughter who didn't sleep great, so I slept with her last night, and she was all over the place, scratching, itching, tossing. But that's fine. So we're doing great, and we have an excellent. This is our favorite genre of Moscow time because it's time for Moscow time. This is our favorite genre, right? We've picked up a few of these over time now. They're sort of an up and coming Moscow time genre, right? We like the ones that's all about eating bugs and don't exercise. Those are really good Moscow times, right? We'll always go with those ones. But these new ones, this is a whole new genre, and I love it. This is from the New Yorker magazine, right? So the New Yorker magazine really, and you got to hand it to the New Yorker magazine. So far, I've only seen like the Atlantic and a few of these other media outlets going for this new genre of Moscow time, but they have it here, right? The New Yorker, the rise of Latino white supremacy. We haven't seen that one yet, right? We've seen some people explain that there's black white supremacy and other things, but this is a new one, right? The rise of Latino white supremacy. And it says, at a time of rising racial violence, Latinos are potential perpetrators and potential victims. So if you keep reading the New Yorker, you can get information like that. Excellent Moscow time entertainment. Excellent. And it gives me that theme that I want to talk a bit about today, that, the fake prison of two ideas. We're going to be talking about that again today. The Glenn Greenwald idea that one of the things that politics ends up doing is it forces people into binary thought, right? So sort of a false matrix of dichotomies, let's say. That's, I think, what I put in the title today. And it's, the red and the blue, and often you can never see the third option because it's not even presented within the construct of the debate, right? So you get people debating on one side, on the other side, and that ends up defining the reality of it. Even here with this headline, right? It's potential perpetrators, or potential victims. Now, the first thing I'm going to mention today actually relates to some of the Moscow Times stories from a few days ago, and it involves Robert F. Kennedy. So Kennedy yesterday did something. At first, it looked really stupid, right? So Robert F. Kennedy came out with a tweet yesterday about the Washington Post, about and quoting a Washington Post article. Imagine quoting. If that's not a Gelman amnesia, I don't know what is, right? The things they've said about him, and then all of a sudden Kennedy using the Washington Post as proof of an argument. So what he was talking about here was the Amanda Gorman book, and we discussed that a few days ago. She was the girl who read a poem at Biden's inauguration, and the Washington Post wrote that fake news story about DeSantis's shameless defense of the Amanda Gorman fiasco is revealing, right? So that was the article that Kennedy shared. And what he wrote was, everyone seems fine with censoring as long as it is happening on the other side. Ron DeSantis cheers the removal of Amanda Gorman poem from a school library in Florida. The poem expresses a message of racial healing that most Americans would agree with. Then he says, it's ironic that the Washington Post would take an anti-censorship stand, however, given its participation in the censorship industrial complex in recent years. So here's Kennedy saying exactly what I just said, right? Coming from the Washington Post, who is a scandalous magazine, a scandalous newspaper that tells nothing but lies, funny that they're coming out defending this stuff. So he kind of sat with it for a minute, but of course his comments blew up and everyone's saying you got it wrong. Everyone who would have watched this show in the morning, The Breakup, knows that that thing never happened, right? This book was never banned. All that happened was it was moved from one bookshelf to another, right? So it wasn't on the kids' bookshelf anymore. It was moved to the middle school book section, which was more appropriate for its reading level or whatever. But the book is not banned, right? Even the kids in the kids section, if they knew what they were looking for, could easily walk over to the middle school section of the same library and get the book, right? So it was really like a filing thing. And Kennedy, here's the good news, right? This is what makes Kennedy different. Actually different. It might seem like a little thing. It might seem so stupid, right? So he comes out, gives those two tweets, and what ends up happening is he tweets, believe it or not, a correction. Someone has corrected themselves publicly. Stop the presses, right? The Washington Post should write an entire article just about that someone was able to not fall into this mudslinging, fake prison of two ideas, fake false matrix of dichotomies. Oh, you're interested in freedom of speech, but you said something about this person, therefore you're also terrible, right? So getting stuck in this quagmire is what we don't want, right? So here's his correction. I got some facts wrong in my initial tweet. The poetry book was not banned, just moved to a different section of the library. And to clarify, DeSantis had nothing directly to do with the school's action. The Washington Post was criticizing his failure to defend the author, Amanda Gorman. All in all, not as big an issue as the Washington Post made it appear. Now, again, what I love is that he showed an ability to change his mind and to admit he was wrong and to say why he was wrong publicly without a lot of time going by. Now, that's one of the things you're just never going to get with Trump. You're not going to get that. Now, I'm not one of these people who believes that Trump is an egomaniac and is incapable of changing his opinion. I definitely think he's capable of something like this, right? I think that's possible. But Trump, he's got his own machinations. We're dealing with someone who was just cut from a different cloth, right? This is an artist. Trump is an actual artist. And whether you like his aesthetic or not, it doesn't really matter. He's not there to not offend you, right? Part of his artistic expression is offensive, right? He is offensive by nature. And so we don't expect him to be a person who admits they're wrong and goes back on it. We're not really asking for that, right? When it comes to Trump, and again, this is the one caveat that I always use to understand why smart people that I know continue to hate Trump, right? There's always going to be those people. And the truth is, and I've mentioned it here before, and I'm totally sympathetic to it, he's a bully. Trump is 100% a bully, 150% a bully. And I understand why there are people who never want to deal and give any credit or any support to a bully. Like, I totally understand that, right? Now, I've always understood him as a bully, and I don't have that reflex to just not want to be associated with a bully, right? I think a lot of the people who liked Trump in 2016 knew he was a bully and said, sure, let's go with the bully. Why not, right? Like, bully time. But like I said, there are people who I've met in my life, many people who I've met in my life, who are smart, not part of a Democrat prison idea situation, who just cannot abide Trump. And I get it. Like, I totally get it, right? And I won't try to argue with those people if I can tell someone has sort of the PTSD of having dealt with bullying when they were a kid. I get it. Right? You're never going to like Trump. It's just not going to happen. And I accept that, right? So, and again, another thing that I've mentioned several times, I don't want to be in the business of explaining Trump and why Trump isn't as bad as you think for 4 more years. That was fine for 2016 to 2020. But one of the encouraging things here about someone like Kennedy, right? Not a bully, like that's clear, and capable of changing their mind and doing so publicly in a way that I think everyone can get a lot of encouragement that he won't make this kind of mistake where he gets something totally wrong and then just doubles down, digs his heels in, and goes with it. That's what you get in politics all the time. I mean, politics is but that at this point, right? Everyone will know they're lying. It's a little bit like what we were talking about yesterday with the Russian disinformation and American media having to report on stories that make it seem like Trump is colluding with Russia and they're trying to help him. And it's more of the 2016 Mueller investigation stuff where we know it's simply because they can't admit they were wrong. They can't admit the correction that they had this whole thing sized up incorrectly, that the Steele dossier and everything that was around it is really more embarrassing to them, an indictment of their inability to do their work and do journalism, right? And instead using themselves as the official opposition to Trump instead of actually giving Trump credit where or not blaming Trump for things he just simply didn't do, right? It's what, Matt Taibbi had one of the best criticisms I've ever heard of Trump on any of this stuff, which is there's enough to criticize Trump on just as a person, as a leader and whatever. You don't have to make stuff up, right? What I just said, criticizing him about being a bully, there's a lot there. There's a lot of material there. You don't have to go out of your way to find stuff about Trump to criticize him with. But you got to give him credit when he gets things right? You have to, because otherwise you get stuck in this false matrix of dichotomies and this fake prison of two ideas and this red versus blue, and then that defines reality without understanding that the spectrum of colors out there are way greater. So let's contrast that for a second, right, with AOC, right? So what happened with AOC yesterday? What ends up happening is when you can't change your opinion, admit you're wrong, break out of this false prison of two ideas, what you'll actually do is keep your wrong opinion and then bend the rest of the world to make sense to fit into your opinion, as if that's easier, right? So here's an example. So first of all, let's just talk a bit about her being in the news, right? So she's in the news right now because the AOC parody account, I don't know if you guys have seen this AOC parody account. It just says literally that, AOC parody, right? AOC press parody. It even says parody in parentheses on it. And AOC, the real AOC yesterday, was bringing attention to this AOC parody account saying, there's someone in here who's a parody and you might not know the difference, even though it says parody right in it, right? It says parody right in it. So this account has gone viral because it said things like the only way out of inflation is to print more money and a few of these things. But the problem with AOC and the parody account is indeed some people can't tell the difference because AOC comes up with such insane ideas that make no sense to anyone sometimes. And one of those ideas came out yesterday. So in the context of all of this AOC fake press parody account and the real AOC and what are her real opinions and what's going on with all of that, well, here's one thing she really did say. Like, not the parody account, right? Not the parody account. This is something that came out of actual AOC's mouth, her brain, and she actually wrote it down and shared it publicly, which is the following, right? So she warned everyone not to be fooled by her parody accounts, and at the same time comes in, not a parody, right? Says that, how much does the Supreme Court benefit us Americans? I don't think it does. So she comes out and publicly says that the US Supreme Court and the division of powers doesn't do much. It's just nothing, right? So remember, she can't admit that they got anything wrong about policy, about the constitutionality of certain laws. And what is it that the Supreme Court actually does is judicial supervision, right? So they supervise the courts below them. So by that, all that means is, was there a mistake in law? So they look at the judgments of the lower courts and look and see if there was a mistake made in the doling out of justice in that case, and they'll review that. And then they'll also look at laws that are either constitutional or unconstitutional. They'll look at the constitutionality of different laws that come out of Congress. So they don't have a huge mandate. They don't hear many cases a year, right? And the ones that they do are generally in this category of judicial supervision and making sure there is some form of bulwark against populism, right? It is a bulwark against populism, the court. And so here's her logic, right? So this is a Jonathan Turley article. It often seems that our politics of rage has created a new age of berserkers, warriors revered for their blind, destructive fury. In order to distinguish yourself from the rest of the mob, you must show a willingness to lay waste to any structure or institution on the path to victory. That type of bloodlust politics was on display this week when House Judiciary Committee, blah, 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 talked about court packing. So America's done, by the way. It completely finished if they get into the court packing arguments. Court packing looks like this. Right now, we have 9 Supreme Court justices in the United States. What court packing is, and there is a provision in the Constitution to add a few of these, but all that's going to happen is you're going to add a few, and then the next party is going to add more, and then more, and then more. So every single time, you're just going to have the cup filled up a little bit each time to get to a majority of the party in power in order to move the Supreme Court in alignment with the political entities controlling Congress. So you'll politicize the court, right, which makes it ineffective. Now there is a shred of credibility in the court because the 9 people have persisted for a certain amount of time. A lot of them Trump appointed. I guess he appointed 3, right? Was it 3? 2, 3? Appointed enough to tip the balance of the court 5-4 towards conservatives. So that's where the whole court packing argument comes from. Now, this was a plan that Republicans had for like 30 years, right? This was the only thing they talked about. This is all the only thing they wanted. They wanted to do exactly this to get into Roe v. Wade and all of those things. So this whole idea then of court packing is highly political. Looks like a terrible idea, right? A terrible idea. And what does she say, right? AOC says she challenged the rules of courts in overturning laws. She questioned just functionally the idea that 9 people, that a 9-person court can overturn laws that thousands, hundreds of thousands of legislators, activists, and policymakers drew consensus on. She then, how much does this current structure benefit us? I don't think it does. So the current structure is called judicial review, as I was just mentioning. This is the Jonathan Turley piece. It is a very thing that prevents authoritarian rule. Notably, there is little difference in 9 or the proposed 13 justices overturning laws. Hundreds of thousands of legislators have drew consensus on. And it's true, right? What difference does it make if it's 13, 15, 19, whatever the number? It's still a minority that would be overturning the huge majority, right? And there's, obviously reasons why this is the case in the United States. And the famous decision, the Marbury decision, if you didn't learn US law on this, the very essence, this is from the decision, the very essence of civil liberty certainly consists in the right of every individual to claim the protection of the laws whenever he receives an injury. Part of that right to review is the challenging of unconstitutional federal laws. Marshall noted that the powers of the legislator are defined and limited, and that those limits may not be mistaken or forgotten. The Constitution is written. He then wrote famously, it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is, right? So it is the thing that keeps you from the tyranny of the majority, right? There is such a thing as a tyranny of the majority. And if you have a tyranny of the majority, you're going to live with a situation where indeed you'll have entirely political courts that just ebb and flow with the parties. And you might not even anymore, because at one point you're able, if you control the political apparatus and then you control the legal apparatus and the separation of powers is no longer the case, you theoretically could be in power forever, right? Like forever. There would be no stopping that. So I think most people know that, and I think most people understand that. But hearing it come from a politician who would indeed rather change the entire system that America has used for however many years, simply because it doesn't fit her current politics, right? So because it doesn't fit her current politics, she's willing to do it. Now, the free press, now put that, go back to RFK for a second. Think about RFK and what it meant for him to change his mind quickly, same day, on a big issue, freedom of speech, big issue, right? And to publicly say, whoops, got it wrong. What a breath of fresh air that is for the political system in the United States. And I see nothing but good things that can come of that. And indeed, you're seeing this appetite. Here's the Free Press, right? Here's a headline: RFK Jr. and the populist wave. Why are Kennedy and Marianne Williamson polling so highly against Biden? It says one Democratic backer, there's a reckoning coming. And that's what I heard in Miami, by the way. I don't really roll in a lot of Democrat circles, but a lot of Democrats rolled through Miami because of RFK and everything else that was going on. And I was surprised about the Democrats that I met. Remember when we first said here on the show that the whole slogan of Kennedy Democrats was going to be a really big deal, that it had a real catchiness to it. It had a attractiveness to the slogan. People could say, wait a minute, am I a Kennedy Democrat? Right? Immediately it forces you to think about the question, what it means versus normal Democrats, who a lot of people don't want to be associated with them. They don't want to be associated with Republicans either, right? That's definitely a thing. So you get this situation where we're starting to have this appetite for people who are totally against the norm. And remember what happened with AOC, like I was saying, right? She was heckled at her own event the other day, called a warmonger. And so things are changing, right? Things are changing. And indeed, there is a populist wave that would be this sort of third rail, right? That would be this potential to to sort of break free of this matrix of dichotomies. And indeed, you're seeing a bit of it now in the debt ceiling debate. So, it looks like it's changing again, the whole fault lines around the debt ceiling debate. I'm not here. I don't know the details of the debt ceiling debate. The deal still looks stupid and awful to me, right? That's what it looks like to me. I'm happy that the tax piece for Bitcoin miners is out. It looks like some of the stuff with the IRS is stalled, but freezing the baseline benchmark for spending of government is stuck at the COVID highs, right? That they're locking in COVID spending numbers to go forward, which seems insane. Thomas Massey had a few interesting things to say. Speaking of people who are able to break free regularly of popular opinions or groupthink or his own political party, but he says this deal could be okay. So this is what he says: when Republicans say, let's go back to pre-COVID spending levels, that's code for let's spend less than we helped Trump spend in his last term. These folks enabled those levels by not opposing the CARES Act and caused the inflation that scaled up subsequent spending. Here he goes on again to say that he's going to, he respects opposition to the debt ceiling deal, but he's voting yes. I've been in Congress for a decade, and this is the first real bill that cuts spending. It also includes an automatic 1% cut to spending on January 1st if Congress doesn't pass the appropriation bills. So again, I don't necessarily understand all the ins and outs that he's talking about here. And here's his roadmap thread. There are at least 5 things Congress calls spending: budgets from the Budget Committee, authorizations to spend money from various committees, appropriations from APROPS Committee, entitlements, non-discretionary spending by law, and the debt limit. So his whole point here is that all of these things combined mean the debt limit is just one part of spending, and it's just permission to spend. It's not the actual spending. So when he goes into the appropriation stuff, he says that that's where they're going to claw back spending for the IRS and all these other things. So we'll see. But the difference here, though, is by embracing the higher debt ceiling. So that's fine. It looks like Thomas Massey has a pretty interesting take on what's going on, a little different than some of the Republicans who are all for it. Some of the Republicans, Byron Donalds, for example, blasted it, says it's a terrible deal. You get more and more people saying just a terrible deal, getting sold out. So again, it's one of those things, it's necessarily about this fake prison of two ideas, the blue and the red and the fighting. But there are consequences that are interesting for Bitcoiners, and that's why we're going to talk about it, right? So Tavi Costa is a macro, one of these macro guys on the internet, right? Oh, graphs, things going up, careful, T-bills. One of these guys. So Tavi Costa, people call him, are talking about the appetite. He had a long tweet thread yesterday that a lot of people shared about the appetite for this US debt now that the actual debt limit. So remember what we've talked about here before, Dutch disease, that America's number one export has been debt for a long time. In fact, the whole world has been clamoring to buy US debt in order to continue to manipulate their currencies to sell to Americans as the number one marketplace and all of that stuff. So Tavi Costa here says, investors are beginning to recognize the true risk this time. This is about the debt ceiling debate, right? So the true risk this time around lies not in the failure to reach an agreement, but rather in the escalating and concerning nature of the debt problem. This problem is further amplified by the diminishing availability of treasury buyers, something that we've been talking about here for a long time. So in the same way that the Korean central bank or the Japanese central bank or the Chinese central bank explicitly would manipulate their exchange rate with the US dollar. I've mentioned many times about living in Korea, seeing this was just normal things that 20-year-old girls did. They just Forex managed risk, right? Treasury managed their own currencies because they might be taking a trip to America because they were so used to their own government manipulating their currency that they didn't want to lose money that way. So it was very matter of fact and normal for them. And I've mentioned those anecdotes before. You're having a coffee with, I was 20 years old, 21 years old or something. You're talking to a Korean girl who's the same age, and she's saying, "Yeah, just sling Korean won and dollars, and make sure I have more dollars, and blah blah blah." And what are you talking about? What the hell is going on here, right? As someone who grew up with Canadian dollars in a very low exchange rate when I was a teenager, the ski hill across the border where my farm is now used to take it at par. So we used to just run our own foreign exchange scam, I guess. Any American dollars you had, you would never spend on a lift ticket because you lost money that way. You just use your Canadian money. That was as sophisticated as I got back then. But hearing these people just trade normally. Now, the reason this was possible was because the demand was there from the other banks to manipulate the currency. And what Tavi Costa is saying is it's not going to be the same this time, right? That the demand just isn't going to be there for US debt like it was before. So who's the buyers, right? So here's what he says. The current lack of demand is indeed a growing problem that may ultimately necessitate the intervention of the Fed as the buyer of last resort. We can recall the historic sell-off of UK gilts, right, which is something we covered right here on the show as it was happening, right, triggered by a tax cut announcement that investors perceived as posing a significant risk to the country's financial stability. The situation led the Bank of England to reverse its QT course and intervene as a buyer of UK bonds. In our strong opinion, he says, the US is primed to have its own Bank of England moment. Given the dire levels of global debt, foreign central banks are compelled to prioritize enhancing the quality of their international reserves to support their monetary systems. And then he goes on about gold. Oh, I need gold. It's all going to be gold, right? In essence, these institutions function similar to traditional businesses. They require high quality assets on their balance sheets to establish financial stability. So he talks about the end of gold and how it has to be a thing again, and about how all these foreign central banks are currently buying up a bunch of gold, right? So it's already happening. We've talked about that here a bunch. They've reversed their stance. They're becoming significant buyers of gold these days. And what he says is that this ends up having an effect on our entire idea of the 60-40 portfolio split, buying bonds and buying equity or stocks, and all of these things are changing, and our entire formula for looking at the high end of wealth management and investment and portfolio management and treasury management and all these things that make the financial world go round are about to change because of this debt ceiling debate, right? Because this time it is different. The buyers of the debt that America is saying they're just going to issue and people are going to buy is not going to be the same. So William Middlecoop also picked up on this, and he says, remember what happened after the suspension of the U.S. debt limit in August 2019. The huge amount of money needed by the U.S. Treasury led to the repo crisis within weeks. To tackle this crisis, the Fed had to start emergency quantitative easing in September 2019. After the debt ceiling was suspended in early August 2019, the U.S. Treasury quickly set out to rebuild its dwindling cash balances, draining more than $120 billion of reserves in the 30 days between August 14th and September 17th alone. And half of this amount was burned in the last week of that period. Now, we've talked about it many times, I did the fake news tour on CNN and Fox News it was sort of the last time I involved myself with the fake news, was in this period in 2019. And I basically quit the fake news from here out because they were too rock bottom stupid for me to even bother going there anymore. It's also because I left New York City and didn't get the black car service and the limos and all that. That was pretty fun, right? You get the black car and they pick you up and you go and you say Bitcoin, and then, they drive you all around and drive you home after. It was always a good time, right? But when it turned into like the Zoom thing, right? So now I got to just go on Zoom and it's like Bitcoin up, Bitcoin down, hack, right? Super boring stuff because the interviewers don't really know what's going on planet Earth. These are some of the rock bottom stupid people that we talk about here all the time. These people are not just caught in the fake prison of two ideas. They don't even know there are two ideas. They're just saying they're one idea, right? So this is some pretty low IQ or at least formulaic content being produced by these large media outlets. And there's no benefit personally to go on CNN or Fox or any of these networks, right? No one really watches this stuff. It's just people passively looking at the information and all that. So when I went and did all this stuff to talk about how the repo market was quantitative easing, they looked at me in 2019 like I was the idiot, right? Like I was the stupid person. And you Bitcoiners don't get it. It's technical. Come on, you don't understand. I said, well, yeah, maybe I don't understand, but this is quantitative easing as I understand it to be. And this can't persist. You're going to have a huge print event in the next whatever months. And of course, we've talked about it. We had COVID within months of that happening. So here he is bringing us back to the last time the debt ceiling was removed and all this debt was issued. Again, there were no buyers. Right. So that's why you had to have the reverse repo market do this. So already this sort of fake prison of two ideas, this matrix of dichotomies, already back then was falling apart because let me add it again to what is this fake prison of two ideas, right? Well, you're starting to see it. It's the gold and the debt. And Luke Gromen, who Bitcoiners might know, right? Luke Gromen, I believe he was on a Bitcoin podcast last night with Nick Carter and a few others talking exactly, and Lynn Alden, I believe, was there too, talking exactly about this. And what he argues now is that given this return to the 2019 repo rumble, the return to the situation where the US has this debt that they're trying to offload onto the world and the buyers just aren't showing up like Tavi Costa just mentioned, Luke Gromen ends up signaling this debate and puts it into the context of a little bit of the BRICS too and what's going on with that new shitcoin and when are they going to launch it. So what he says here is the following. The world appears to be dividing itself into two camps globally along the following lines. 1, USD is the base layer, US treasuries, debt. 2, energy is the base layer, and he puts that as gold. In my opinion, the energy cliff, and he's referring to someone who had another chart, is a forcing function that reveals which worldview is correct. So that one of them is tied into energy and one of them is tied into debt really starts showing how we can break out of this dichotomy. And here he mentions that the demand for either Chinese money or US dollars and US debt has this third option. Now, he says gold here, and I'm pretty sure I didn't watch the podcast or listen to it last night. I'm pretty sure that's what he argued. But of course, more people out there will continue to tell you that Bitcoin is a better expression of energy and energetic systems than gold will ever be, right? So we're not going to go over that argument here. I always assume you guys know enough about Bitcoin that we don't have to do Bitcoin lessons every day. But for that reason, right? So just seeing the world in those terms, there's a article or a study, actually. Maybe it wasn't a study. Maybe it's just a statement. But this comes from Fidelity, right? So Fidelity, long been really big bulls for Bitcoin, right? So now think about what we just said, right? So energetic systems, this energy cliff, worldviews, do you base it on debt? Do you base it on energy? And the potential to, and so there's other people who say it's the China. So the fake prison would be the BRICS2 shitcoin, Chinese government plus the Russian government plus the other countries, and creating trade markets in whatever coin they come up with, and that'll be the two options. Bitcoiners, of course, offer a third option that doesn't involve these countries, right? It doesn't involve any of these things, and it involves energy indeed being the metric system for the economy. So in this case, energetic systems, how much energy we produce, how much energy we use, all of those would become defining statistics for the economy versus currently GDP, employment, and all these other economist metrics that people use. So this would be a complete overhaul of how we measure and gauge what's going on in the economy. But for those reasons, Fidelity came out with this yesterday, right? So this is what they said. Fidelity, one of the largest asset managers in the world, with $10 trillion AUM, assets under management, called for a $1 billion Bitcoin price, not a million, $1 billion Bitcoin price by 2038. And the reason he does so is exactly for the argument that I'm making now. Energetic systems, energy systems becoming measured in Bitcoin, which then becomes the metric system for the entire economy. And you have achieved at that point the separation of money and state, if that is the case. If you have corporate interests who are now always interested in another system for saving their wealth, transacting in, settling in, and it removes it from the now, yeah, the $1 billion might say more about the dollar than about Bitcoin. Not exactly. So in the sense that the $1 million price was always gauged. If you remember how the $1 million price came about, by the way, it was the entire global economy measured, divided by Bitcoin. And then it worked out to something like $1 million a coin. But this was the 2012 global economy, which was not nearly the same size as today. And so indeed, I think he is talking about what you mentioned here, more about the dollar. But it does suggest the ubiquitous takeover of the financial system will be there, which is why I've always argued that Bitcoin will no longer be the number one data point in Bitcoin, isn't going to be the US dollar exchange rate forever. Now, I'm someone who, that's how CoinDesk made its entire business, right? CoinDesk invented the index price of Bitcoin to be a reference. And that allowed CoinDesk to be really successful in 2015, 2016, 2017, because there was no other indexed price out there that you could reference in media. So it meant that all of the fake news had to use our name in any story they wrote about Bitcoin. So any story the fake news wrote in 2015, 2014, Bitcoin, blah, 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 according to CoinDesk. They had to put the according to CoinDesk in, which helped for all kinds of things and the way the internet works, SEO and all of these things. But nevertheless, the idea of that, right, building your business, which CoinDesk did, it built its business around having this reference rate for Bitcoin. And, you had to think beyond that. And so that's what I started to think about already back then. Well, what's going to happen if this isn't the data point going forward? At a certain point, if it does turn into $1 million a coin, is it going to make news that it's $1,010,000 a coin, $1,020 a coin? No, of course not, right? No one will know the difference. It's too small. If we're right and we take over, right? So I had to start imagining, and this is some work that I did with Kraken, was just to start imagining proof of reserves, for example, as a data point that could easily take over as a reference for the industry. This exchange has so much capital on hand, they can therefore lend and do other things like that. But the energy system is even tighter, right? So that if the economy itself is now measured in Bitcoin metrics, that seems a more appropriate standard for hyper-Bitcoinization. Just measuring things in Bitcoin means you've achieved that level. It isn't necessarily reporting about Bitcoin exchange rate, more like describing energy being created on Earth in different areas and then expressing how much energy was created in terms of Bitcoin. And that would start giving us the reference rate we require and could use very easily, right? And so again, the opposite of this potential scenario again is either we all adopt US debt and continue to go with that, but it looks like what people are saying here, there's less appetite. The Chinese situation is the opposite of that, right? And so that would be the fake prison of two ideas here, right? It's either a US debt or it's going to be the BRICS 2 shitcoin and whatever it is they create. But here's the issue, right? First of all, the Chinese system, nobody has any faith in that thing being run well. Just look at the history of the renminbi itself, right? It's barely got any history. It's sort of brand new. It only started trading freely in the last 15 years or something, 2010. Here's what someone says on Twitter, Brent Donnelly. Because I'm bored and grumpy, getting fried by the sun through the passenger window of an Uber lurching through the Bronx is how he starts, right? Here's a short fact sheet on the Chinese currency, which some believe can overtake the US dollar for global reserve supremacy. Starting trading globally in 2010, right? So that's it. So 13 years ago. It only started trading outside mainland China in 2010, 13 years ago. And that's because Americans forced them, right? I don't know if you guys remember the history there, but they didn't even want that. Currency is managed against and it was also in order for them to be able to start buying things abroad. So Canada sold a bunch of oil sands to a Chinese company. And one of the reasons why they wouldn't have sold it to them previous to this currency thing happening is exactly that. They didn't, if they could just print the money and there was no real exchange rate, then they couldn't go around buying hard assets. So Canada had something to do with forcing them into this, if I remember correctly. Currency is managed against a basket of currencies that makes its market price track the US dollar closely. Arbitrary government interventions in the market whenever. Subject to random and arbitrary devaluation by the People's Bank of China at any time, most recently in 2015. Capital controls can be lifted or tightened at any time. Leader pivoting to less capitalism and more communism, that'll do. You can, and then this is his conclusion. You can have the yuan and I'll take the dollars. Here's what he says. Bitcoin and the euro have better long-run odds of competing with the US dollar than the Chinese renminbi. And indeed, I mean, can the euro really compete? Right? No, right? No. The dark continent, which is what Europe is at this point, is not coming anywhere close to competing in terms of money. And then China's got its other problems, right? Here's its face freezes, right? Imagine, right? Like the country that has already perfected the CBDC, already perfected surveillance, tracking, both physically and with financial tracking. Let's go with them, right? That's what people are going to choose. Here's what it says. From red light cameras to face freezes, we have to think through digital dystopias to figure out how to defend against them. This is Balaji talking about face freezes. The West already has red light cameras for automated ticketing based on license plates, but this would be next level. I got one of those before. Man, did I hate that feeling. One of those camera tickets. Oh my God. Nothing more frustrating than getting one of those in the mail. China is more capable of doing this with faces because they have better state level facial recognition database. And they've begun deploying face recognition glasses to their officers. Have you seen these glasses the police can wear and it will like pick people out of a crowd? A face freeze like what I just described can be done by one officer with one click or even a drone. The officer just needs a suitable camera plus access to the state's AI and face recognition database. It's just a noisy join, mapping each face in a crowd to their personal details. It's also totally asymmetric. The crowd can't do it back to the officer. For good measure, the officer could send a push notification to every person in the crowd with their arrest, penalties, and court details. I'm going to add they can put a bounty too, right? Bounty hunting in this system works real well. They can even auto debit their WeChat digital wallets for every minute they remain in the crowd, like the ultimate red light camera. Masks may help put gate detection, but gate detection can work around it, though that may be hard in a crowd. Really, the only true countermeasure is to put at least some of the person's digital resources outside the control of a centralized state, to decentralize. As context, police have wanted nonviolent crowd control for a while. Bullhorns don't necessarily work, and tear gas has side effects. But a face freeze like this is scalable, nonviolent, asymmetric, and extremely effective. It really shifts the power to the state, which is why we need to decentralize, right? Now, I could imagine Canada loving this thing, right? Loving it. But it's not just up to Canada. This has to go through the United States, right? All of this has to be fought in the United States. Could they win? Yeah, I think so. But more and more, there is this appetite. What I was mentioning with RFK, there is a reckoning. There is a appetite, just like there is for Kennedy Democrats, just like there is for MAGA Republicans. There is an appetite for some group to punish both of these fake prisons, both the red and the blue. The debt ceiling debate just adds to that narrative. What's going on internationally? So we've got the fake red and blue in America. We've got it internationally with China and America. But both domestically and internationally, Bitcoin offers the third rail. And indeed, when you hear things like $1 billion a coin, when you hear people say, like Luke Groman did, Bitcoin, big potential, just because it is and the other fella on the future of the Chinese money and its capacity to compete with US debt doesn't look good. So $1 billion Bitcoin, guys, incoming. We're there. Let's see what we got in the comments here. All right. 33. I think we've been getting to 60 lately, Dex. We've been doing great. Smash the like. We love the like. Yeah, Tavi Costa is a Brazilian gold and silver analyst. Never talks about Bitcoin. Indeed, Philip. Yeah, I noticed. I noticed he indeed was that. I'm sure 1984 is banned in China, but you'd think the people in charge would be at least a little curious. Oh yeah, live I Ching. Let's do the I Ching. Let me get the I Ching, guys. I got it. Okay. Let me find a good one. I Ching online. The Book of Changes, everyone. Okay. All right. Let me think of my question. Can you guys help me with the question here? What's the question? Yeah. I'm gonna go. Let's do it. Let's keep it to seasons again because I feel like we're entering a summer season. Last time we did it from autumn until the Bitcoin conference. Let's do it until the Bitcoin conference in October. What do you think? We're doing a show in Amsterdam in October. We're going to the dark continent, right? We're going to civilize those people. And yeah, let's do that, right? Let's do it. And we're going to do what are the prospects for Bitcoiners, not for the coin, for the people, for Bitcoiners between now and autumn. Okay, that's what we got. So, what are the prospects for Bitcoiners between now and autumn? Let's see what it says. I Ching. What's going on here? Oh no, this stupid one is telling me cookies, something. Okay, I'm gonna have to try a different service. 1 second. I copied the question though. All right, here we go. This will be better. Tossing the coins, tossing the coins, tossing the coins. Oh, crazy. Steps. So I got the 3 hard lines. Well, let me see if I can show you what I got. I'll read it in a second. I got this one. See it? That's what I got. Okay, I'll read what it says. The simple looking hexagram relates to circumstances which might be inherently risky. In most cases, treading in dangerous places is inadvisable. At this time, however, there is very little danger. It is written in the ancient Book of Changes that one steps on the tail of a tiger at his or her own risk. But the appearance of this hexagram suggests that right now such an act would be ignored or even seen as playful. A more general reference here could be a mingling of people belonging to different social backgrounds. This sign is typically positive. I think that fits, right? What I just mentioned about Kennedy Democrats and MAGA Republicans and people who are from different backgrounds coming together and mingling. I mean, that's what I just mentioned, even about having some Democrat, people at the show and talking with them and seeing what they were saying. So steps, I like it. I like it. I like it. We're doing well. Let me share this in the comments for anyone who wants to read the judgment closely, or the here. Let me see if this works. Yep. Yeah, it'll be in the small steps, still the innovator stage. Yeah. But here's the quote if you guys want to take it. And it's not his simple, it's this. I just couldn't get that last T with my copying on the iPad. All right, team. That's all I got for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for stopping in. We appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll be at the farm tomorrow. Which number is that one? Number 10. Number 10. Number 10. Yeah. We got a number 10. All right, team. Peace.